家好，我是杨泰乐，安富公司的总裁，也是清华安富研究中心的咨询。那今天很高兴有机会邀请到我的老友Larry 来亚洲不动产学会的年会当做一个 keynote speaker， 就请 Larry 给大家一个自我介绍，谢谢。Now, Larry, we'll pass on to you, and could you give us a short description about your career, long-time career path?
Oh yeah, sure. So I studied economics in college and ended up getting a PhD in economics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and have been using my degree in various forms ever since in government, private industry, and quasi-government as well. I'll just mention that I spent my last 16 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, eventually became a senior vice president there, really started the work kind of after the financial crisis. I kind of built up a team called the Risk Assessment Data Analysis and Research Group, or RADAR for short. And what we did over that period was we amassed the largest collection of consumer finance data in the United States. I think the database grew to over 400 terabytes in size by the time I retired. Also built the models for the annual bank stress test, as they call them, that kind of checks the capital adequacy of banks under severe stress scenarios to make sure that we don't have another financial crisis like we did in 2007, 2008. And then conduct research, with that there, and most recently in the climate risk area.
Okay, yeah, Larry and I went all the way back over 25 years when we both worked at Freddie Mac, and it's hard to catch up with his career development. He went from a quasi-government Freddie Mac environment into a private mortgage insurance, pure private institution, and then moved into the supervisory government side. So over this very diverse experience period, how would you compare the similarities and the differences when working with a different setting environment?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So for those of you that are considering what kind of areas that you want to get involved in, it's like very important to consider the type of institution you want to work in. And so that the similarities are that I was doing exactly the same modeling, whether it was in a private company, a quasi-private company, or quasi-public company, or public, or the Federal Reserve, which is a purely federal function, pure a government function, I should say. So I was doing model risk in various forms. But the difference is, for a private company, you're doing it for the company, you're doing it for the business, you're doing it for risk management purposes and to make money. So the work you do is largely proprietary. And so if you're going to do that kind of work, make sure you get paid for it. When I went to work for the Federal Reserve, of course, has a public mission. And the work I did was very public. So you'd publish. It gives you an opportunity to publish things in academic journals, to do your research, for academic and policy journals, for policy purposes. So that's another thing. We're not so much making money as as we obviously have this public mission of financial stability and the like. But there you get opportunities to sort of publish your research. In the quasi-public, quasi-private, where I was at Freddie Mac, it was kind of a little bit in between. They had this mission where they had a public mission, but they also were a profit-making entity. And so there, it was a little bit mixed in between. We did have opportunities to publish some things and all. So again, you got to consider these different things, when you want to go to work. If you like doing research, you're going to have to probably work for an institution like the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Now you mentioned about the research focus on all three different aspects. What are some of the most important advanced research skill that you have developed while you are in the graduate school that becomes most important or useful when to accomplish your duty during those different positions?
Oh, sure. Well, it was sort of what my what my academic training gave me was a great background in econometrics, in theory, to allow me to build models and then to be able to estimate them and ultimately validate them. I got very general skills, so I had no idea I was going to get into mortgage finance, that I was going to be working at the Federal Reserve when I was going through school. But what I got really great training in, first of all, being able to take data, being able to estimate models with them, being able to apply those models. And then also in writing a dissertation, I was able to really develop my writing skills. And I think that's incredibly important because you have to be able to effectively communicate the work that you do. And so, having those skills, while, things I ultimately did was very different than what I did, say, for my dissertation or what I did there, I got the background that I felt confident that I could employ it in whatever work I was doing.
Over the last 16 years, you're with the Fed. Your influence is to the entire U.S. Banking system. And what would you say that some of the most accomplishments you have achieved during that period? And how do you come up with the idea or the strategies to enforce what becomes the industry supervisory role?
Sure. Well, I mentioned that I eventually headed up the risk assessment, data analysis, and research group, the radar group. And that really came out of the financial crisis. I started my work at the Federal Reserve in about 2007, just as the financial crisis was kind of, was starting. And we realized very early that we just didn't have the information to be able to properly analyze what was going on in the market. So one of the first things I did was I kind of said we need to set up some groups, or we needed to sort of collect that information. So my group started to grow there. The risk came out of the financial securities markets, very complicated financial instruments, and so I set up a separate group, fixed income group, that actually analyzed those risks. And then of course we needed to, and we kind of grew from there. Shortly after the crisis came, we started doing what was called annual bank stress tests, where we actually went in and developed models, set up stressful conditions, and sort of estimated bank losses in those conditions. So the group grew from there, and then of course we needed a surveillance function to be able to look at what was going on within the banking system and then in the broader financial market. So my group grew from a couple of people to up to 55, 60 people by the time I left, and that was and so that was really important. But having a group like that could be able to do all that work, I think, was key to being able to gain confidence that that we weren't going to, or that we would be able to sort of manage the risk through another financial crisis like we had to deal with COVID and some other things. So so I think that was an important accomplishment of mine.
Yeah, you mentioned that there are about 50-ish staff reporting to it. Are they all PhD or with advanced degree?
Oh, yeah, it was a whole mix of people. It was some advanced PhDs, was doing the modeling side. Of course, you then needed to have analysts to be able to be able to assist it and to be able to do kind of work. We even needed technology people because we were collecting massive amounts of data, and to be able to process that data in an efficient way, you needed to have people that really understood the technology and things like that. So to be able to run, I think we had over $1 trillion of mortgage-backed securities that we needed to estimate the risks for, and that involved a tremendous amount of computing power and things like that to be able to do that kind of work. It was a whole range of people. We're almost like our own little business, within the Fed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all these people with diverse background, when they want to work together on this very determined business policy function, they must require some deep policy knowledge to be able to efficiently function as a team. So how do they gain this policy perspective knowledge? Are they hired with those knowledge, or they are just coming and be trained on the job?
Yeah, so I think not a lot of people come in with very specific knowledge about the Federal Reserve, things like that, and and myself, when I went in, I obviously had a lot to learn. I think that, and so we would rely not just on people within the group, but we would actually rely on people across the Federal Reserve System to be able to give us guidance, to inform us on the models. So it was very much a collaborative work, both kind of within my group and then like outside the group. We had a supervisory people at the Board of Governors. We had, of course, the governors. We have a chairman. Well, a lot of the directives came down and all. And I think the other thing about what was fun about the research we were doing is that we got lots of people to participate in that, and that was always a lot of fun because it was, we were constantly learning new things, about the Fed, about how the Fed manages risk, about the supervisory function. All those things sort of came in. So it was like, that's what made it kind of fun and exciting to work there, is that you were always learning new things. But it wasn't just within the group. We kind of relied on others outside the group as well. So it was a very collaborative bit of work.
Back to the supervisory. We know that in the early 2000-ish, the US and the Euro and all the developing countries are working together on a Basel II framework. But later on, it seems to be working at the two different directions. One group will continue with the Basel II and Basel III, but the US seems to more focused on stress testing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what do you feel about these two different approaches? Are they complementary or substitution? And how would you suggest to the Taiwan regulators how?
Yeah, well, I think in an ideal world they would be complementary. In practice, not so much so, in the sense that in the Basel II framework, the banks were developing their own internal models, and the Fed was critiquing the models, and the banks are kind of setting things up themselves. Well, you almost never had a bank come back and say, we tested our models and we're not holding nearly enough capital. And so it was a kind of a constant battle there to do that. And actually, in some cases, particularly for like the investment banks, I'm not going to have time to get into the details, but their models had reached the point that they were holding so little capital that when the financial crisis hit, it actually brought a whole bunch of them under. So at that point, the Federal Reserve stepped in and said, we're going to do the modeling ourselves. And so that was why I obviously had to expand and hire the team to be able to do it. And the estimates that we do are the things that are going to go into the stress test for the banks. Mm-hmm. So it was our models. Now, not every regulator has that sort of ability to be able to do that, but I think the idea of stress testing is we're going to set up some stressful scenarios. We're going to make sure that the banks can hold capital under those stressful scenarios. And we're going to estimate our own loss models to make sure that happens. I think that's proved to be a more effective regime than what we had under Basel II. Under Basel II, the capital at the banks actually went down to rates, to levels that were not very safe. Banks are holding a lot more capital now, so I think they have a lot more capacity to be able to absorb losses. That doesn't mean the problems have gone away, but I think we're in a much better place with the regulation than we were under the old Basel II regime. So
it sounds like almost it's probably okay to let the banks do their own internal model and assess their capital on an economic basis. But when the supervisor wants to come in, it's probably not so rigorous to really depend on the bank's model, but you have build your own benchmark to just cross-validating their substitution.
Yeah. Well, let me be clear about that. It probably wasn't as clear as I should have been. We're still requiring the banks to do their own internal modeling. Mm-hmm. It's just you're right that we have our own way to benchmark that and to make assessments, and we certainly do that as part of the process. So I actually had a separate group that would go in and analyze the bank models and to provide comments and critiques on that. Yeah. So that was an important part. So we weren't saying the banks didn't have to do the work. It's just that we were doing our own models, like you said, to be able to benchmark and things. So there was a lot, so there's actually a lot of back and forth in that respect from a supervisory perspective. But we were coming in with a lot better information. We were actually gathering the data from the banks to be able to do the analysis ourselves.
That's the 400 terabyte.
Yeah. So that was it. Yeah, we were, 500 million credit card accounts were getting information every single month. So when we want to analyze risk in the credit card market, we certainly have a lot of information to be able to do that kind of thing.
You have the better information than any bank by themselves.
In some ways, yes, because we were able to look across the whole banking system and not just one individual bank. So in that sense, it was really important. And then we were even gathering data even beyond the banking system, so that we could look at the entire market, not just the bank market. And that's incredibly important because a lot of the market is really a non-bank market, and the non-bank market's been growing.
Yeah.
So understanding risks in that market and how they might, we can then look at how that might impact the banking system as well. Mm-hmm. So having that sort of holistic view, gets into financial stability, risk, and all that sort of stuff. So so that proved to be really critical.
Sounds very challenging, particularly in the current time with the data exploration and all the analytical tool becomes available, AI, machine learning things going on. So maybe the next question would be for the current student at Tsinghua University, what would your advice to them? How do they prepare themselves to enter this kind of data analytics challenging world?
Sure. I think I would encourage them, basically do what I did, at the graduate level, is to get a really solid background in statistics, and also in mathematics, and all, so that you have it. So to get your technical background, I think is really important. The other thing is, I think, is to develop a very broad perspective. And I say really develop your writing skills, because ultimately you're going to need to be able to communicate that. I know there's kind of an idea about engineering and sort of mathematical types. They say, well, I don't really write very well. I'm not an English major. Well, you've got to be able to effectively communicate, and especially if you want to do research. I didn't feel like I really wrote well until I was able to do my own research work, dissertation and kind of research stuff. And even if you're in private industry and you're not doing research, you have to be able to effectively communicate up to your management. And also, I came from a liberal arts background, and so history is really interesting to me, and things, and that really helps broaden your perspective. So, really, take seriously your education in all its aspects. You want the technical background, but you want the writing skills. But then, if you develop a broad perspective, that sort of makes the writing, it makes the analysis much more interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about the importance of communication. As a modeler, I'm not a good writer myself, but just in the old days, I would just say, well, a good writing doesn't help me do better analysis. But later on, the reality tells me if you have a bad writing, it will discredit your research result. So it is not a sufficient tool to help you succeed, but it's a necessary tool that you need to have.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the thing about communication. Obviously, being able to effectively communicate verbally, I think is really important. I was terrified at first, getting up in front of public and doing public speaking and things like that. And so just getting experience with it can be, can be really good. That's why I thought going to conferences, having to get up in front of people, defend yourself, you'll get up and you'll get, somebody will discuss your paper, they'll give you critical comments. You have to be able to respond to them and things like that. So that ability to communicate is really important. It becomes really important, the farther up you go. You're in the public eye, whether, you can be inside an individual business or you can be out in public, but you're, people up above you are looking at you and they're, and they're evaluating you. And how effectively you communicate verbally and in your writing is obviously a critical part of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great advice. Okay, with that, I think we'll conclude today's interview. Thank you. And
thank you. Thank you for having me, Tyler. Thank you.